Welcome to the May 10 Eclipse OpenJ9 community call. As always, please add your name and affiliation to the list of attendees just so we have an idea of who's regularly attending. If you do have something you want on the agenda, feel free to add it in and we'll tackle it either right off the bat or when appropriate. I know Peter and Adam have added some things right off the bat here related to compilers, but I'd like to get to those after we've done the lightning talk that Marius is going to give us. And so at this point, I'll just pause for a second. If there is something you want to add to the agenda, feel free to add it in towards the end. But then I'm going to hand things over to Marius for the lightning talk, and then we'll jump back to the agenda. Marius, if you want to take over the screen sharing.
Let me know when I should.
We can see your screen. We're seeing the PowerPoint's done. There we go. Yep. Anytime you're ready, we're seeing the right thing.
I'll start, right?
Yeah, we see your slides. You can start anytime.
So today I'm going to give you an update on and if you think that it's too much, we can stop after the first topic. So the two topics are JITServer custom matrices. So what did we do this the goal of this work twofold. First, we want to use Prometheus to JITServer performance metrics. Secondly, we want to be able to auto-scale number of JITServer instances based on custom JITServer metrics. For now, JITServer exports 4 different internal metrics: number of connected clients and active combination. In the future, of course, the exporter is implemented as a SIM that only responds to GET requests hash metrics. Data is sent in text at the moment, showing the open metrics protocol. In the future, we may want to encrypt. The feature is already in the code base and will be available in and it's not enabled by default, but it can be enabled. Plus JITServer. And of course, we have the option of specifying the port. This is the default port. Reason to choose. And now I'm going to show you 2 slides which are actually screen captures from going to do a live demo. Screen captures. So this slide here shows a Prometheus graph with the number of active JITServer compilation threads. This experiment, the autoscaler has been configured. Launch another JITServer pod when the number of compilation threads. I apologize for the lights. I couldn't figure out a way to make them bolder, so they are hard to see. This line in blue is the number of active compilation threads for the first instance. At some point, we apply load to it, and the number of compilation. It jumps by 2 because there is also some coarseness in Prometheus getting the information. And when it reaches 6, the autoscaler decides that it's time to launch another JITServer instance. About autoscaler, now just different performance metrics. You can also this is the same experiment. So autoscaler was done at the population threads, but this chart shows available memory. So the first JITServer instance gigabytes available. As we applied now, the number of updates.
Marius, I think we're losing your audio, or maybe I'm just losing your audio. Is it possible you can, I don't know, move closer to the mic or?
I'm not sure which mic I'm using. Okay, I'm going to talk now. So I'll show you that in this case, the number of the available memory drops as load is applied to the system, but then it picks up, and at some point another JITServer instance gets into the system, and we show the available memory for both JITServer instances. And we can do the same for any other metric that is exported by JITServer. And you've seen there are 4 such metrics. And that's all there is to it. I don't have code that will show you how to implement autoscaling, but I do plan to have a blog on how to enable this from a Kubernetes point of view. From the JITServer point of view, as I said, it's just the 2 options that you need. Any questions so far before moving to the second topic? I'll take that as a no. So now let's look at the JITServer AOT server-side caching. So the idea behind this feature is to reduce the JIT compilation CPU overhead by caching compiled methods at the server and then serve the clients directly from the cache rather than performing the compilation again. So this is very similar to the usage of the AOT technology, except that it's going to be applied at the cluster level. In fact, in order to simplify the implementation, not that it's trivial, we decided to leverage as much as we can from the shared class cache and AOT technology. However, there's a distinction here. So typically, an AOT method refers to other shared class cache entities, its location and validation records by shared class cache offsets. Whereas for the serialized AOT code at the server, so this one refers to shared class cache entities by unique identifiers, which point to serialization records. For example, ROM classes are identified by a fully qualified name and a secure hash. When we have a cache hit, the server sends to the client the serialized AOT method. The client then deserializes the received information, computing the corresponding local shared class cache offsets, and then stores this AOT method in the local shared class cache. From there, it's going to be loaded like any other regular AOT method. There are a couple of limitations of this approach. Previously, we are leveraging as much as we can from the shared class cache technology. Therefore, the client must have a local shared class cache with some free spacing. This complicates the process of embedding a shared class cache into the container, but I think it's still manageable. And the second limitation is that at the moment, the server-side AOT cache is in memory. When the server terminates, the cache is destroyed. However, we think we can implement persistence on this. That will come in the future. Another limitation is that because each server has its own cache, there is no attempt to coordinate between different caches that exist in the cluster. So you may have 3 or 4 JITServer servers instances, but they are more or less independent from one another. In terms of options, again, this feature is not enabled by default, so if you want to enable it, you have to use this option, JITServer, use AOT cache. You have to use it both on the client and at the server. When the feature is enabled, the client JVM underneath the covers is going to use XAOT, ForceAOT, take as much as possible advantage of it. Any questions before looking at some performance graphs? Okay. So I decided to make it more complicated and show you the auto-scaling behavior when using JITServer and JITServer with the cache. The system that I'm going to use is composed of a single node, Kubernetes node with version 1.23. This node has 16 CPUs available and 16 gigabytes of RAM. Inside, we find from 1 to 16 instances of Air, the application which runs on top of Open Liberty. And each Air instance is limited to 1T and 450 megabytes of memory. Actually, when we use JITServer, the memory is limited to 225 because we've seen that JITServer can save you. What else? So all these instances are connected to a single MongoDB instance. And if we are using JITServer, all these instances, one instance, limit of 8 CPUs. In the front, we have an Nginx ingress, which uses this EWMA load balancing policy. I'm going to talk about later. And load is applied with JMeter and the configuration on the graph. JMeter is outside the cluster. Of course, there is inside there is a horizontal port autoscaler component, which scales the number of Air instances. Starts at 1 and it can scale up to 16. Without JITServer, I have seen that we actually put 16 instances. If I would allow it to go over 16, maybe it could have gone over 16. The autoscaler is configured such that it will launch a new instance when the average CPU utilization of the Air pods by processor. So this is the configuration. On the right, we have a graph showing the throughput of Air during autoscaling. There are two lines on this graph. In orange, we have the baseline that doesn't use the JITServer, and we have the JITServer configuration. At this point, we are not using the AOTs. If you compare the two lines, you can clearly see the advantage. The throughput is typically larger with JITServer during the ramp up, and these drops in throughput are narrower and shallower. Now you may be wondering why this so rapid behavior, and this is due to, and I can explain it better if we are going to use a load balancing policy of round robin. So with round robin, the balancer tries to give an equal amount of requests. And when a new instance starts up, the performance of it is going to be very poor. In turn, the performance of all the other existing instances will be poor because they have to deliver the same number of requests. And I have a graph again if you. I have found this other policy, exponential weighted moving average. So this one gives more requests to Air instances that have a better response time. Less requests to the larger response time. So the behavior is better, but it's still not as good as you expect it to be. There are still ups and downs. Having said that, I actually tried yet another ingress. So I moved from Nginx to HA proxy, which is the default in OpenShift. The that one is also very bad. And the default there, again, is round robin, which, as I mentioned previously. Now let's look at performance of server AOT server-side caching. The graph on the left compares JITServer versus JITServer with AOT caching. Maybe it's not as visible, but the green line, which is the JITServer with AOT, it has a better behavior. Again, these drops in throughput are shallower in width, no shallower in depth, and they are narrower in width. A better behavior in auto speed using AOT caching because the ramp-up behavior of RDF is better. And on the right, I have a comparison between the best and the worst. So it's a baseline compared to JITServer with AOT caching. So clear that JITServer AOT caching outperforms. The takeaway from this slide is that, first of all, JITServer with AOT caching performs better than without caching. And the second, the takeaway is that much better ramp up and smaller throughput disruptions are going to use. Everything I have for any questions?
Thanks for the presentation, Marius. It's some really interesting technology that you've developed there. Just looking at the time, in the interest of time, can we take questions via Slack? If people do have questions, can you reach out to Marius via Slack or chat function here, and we'll follow up that way. We'll pull the agenda back up, and we will jump back into that to see if we can get through the rest of the things that we need to look at. Peter, I see that you and Adam have added some things to the agenda here for compilers, if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, so just a warning to everyone that yesterday we updated the compiler for AIX JDK 11 to 16.1. So you need to have your OpenJ9 and your extensions in sync, or you're going to have a compilation problem. And you'll need to have the 16.1 runtime installed on the machine where you're running the JVM, which you already needed for 17, but now you need it for 11 as well. That was the first thing. Second thing, we're ready to update Java 17 and 18 to use GCC 10.3. So I just wanted to warn everybody and make sure nobody had any concerns with doing that. I think we can go ahead and do that this week.
That matches what OpenJDK is building with?
That's right. And then GCC 11.2 for JDK 19. Adam mentioned on Slack he wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I think we're ready to roll that out as well, or make that change. It's already rolled out everywhere. Except for Linux builds in a container that's maintained by Adopt, so we're just waiting on their side to do their work. If we're ready to go before them, can we just hold back Linux on 7.5 for now? Is that okay, or is that a problem? I don't expect it to be more than a week or two.
Maybe we just wait. I don't know if there's any rush to update JDK 19. We'll get the 17 and 18 going this week, and I'll have to talk to you about that for the Adoptium pipeline side of that.
Okay.
And then if we have to wait a week or two for 11.2, we might as well just wait. Yep. We have, 19's not coming out till September.
Right. For Simmer side, I think we also use it on Linux, but same story. That's fine.
Then,
that's all I had.
Thanks, Adam. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the end user issues and we'll move to the roadmap. Pete, is there anything you want to call out around the release schedule?
I don't think so, other than a reminder that we're branching on the 20th.
So if you own one of those issues in that milestone, please take a look, make sure they're moving forward, and that we can get that cleaned out and completed for the branch. Similar reminder around JDK 19, of course. Please be watching what needs to go in there, because our branch date seems like it's a fair ways away, but it's going to creep up on us if we're not watching that aggressively. Shelley, is there an update from Adopt?
No, not really. Just a quick note that the marketplace is to go live May 26th, which would include the Samaru stuff, which OpenJ9 is base of. So look for that, I guess.
It's great news. Shelley? Adam, is there anything else for infrastructure you want to call out?
Yeah, I was going to say, did Pete want to say a sentence about 1801, or did I miss that at the beginning?
Yeah, there is a Java 1801.1 release. It doesn't really impact OpenJ9. OpenJ9 doesn't need to do a new release. Samaru is going to make a 1801.1 update.
Just a change of extensions.
Is that a Samaru specific change, or is that something driven by OpenJDK changes?
It's just some OpenJDK changes. There is a couple of bug fixes and a time zone update that OpenJDK did and created a 1801.1 release. I think the fixes got into 11 and 17 before the last release, the April release, but they didn't make it into 18, so there's an update to get those fixes in. There's no new OpenJ9 version required to pick that up.
Sounds good.
In terms of infrastructure, I didn't update this section yet, but Artifactory disk seems to be stable again. We have access to OSU A Linux OpenStack, so we've got 2 machines provisioned there. We just need to finish setting them up. And we have room for 8 total, so 6 for OpenJ9 and 2 for OMR. That's good news. Windows 19, setting that machine up. We did make some progress on the admin side of things, so we seem to be ready to go on for that purposes. So we just have to finish setting up the machine, embedding it, and then we can clone it out. And I just think we fixed those Mac issues that Pete was mentioning. So we got the one newer Mac 10 on the line, and we disabled the 2 old Mac 1011s. So those are offline and can be upgraded if we have time and if they work.
Thanks, Adam. Devin, is there anything we need to call out for the CMake?
Nothing really to call out, but for the cross-compile changed for default, it looks like there's, there was one issue, but it turned out to be a false alarm. So given that no one has any objections, I'm going to be opening that PR to change that default.
That's good. I think given the lightning talk on JITServer, we'll skip that for today. Reminder that the next microJIT meeting is coming up on the 19th. Toby, is there anything you want to call out for CRIU support?
No, nothing of note. We're still wrapping up some of the security changes, and once that's complete, we'll roll out the second early access. That's it.
Jack, for Project Loom?
Yes, Dan. So OpenJDK have just merged their Loom extension repo into their head branch. Jason is looking at the merge conflicts that we're seeing in our extension repo for JDK Next. He's currently working on resolving the conflicts there. Right now, I am working locally off our clone, which was from the OpenJDK's Loom side repo. I was able to get the code to compile and run Java version, but with some hanging after Java version have completed when we're trying to exit some threads. So I'm looking into what exactly was causing the issue for the hang when we're about to exit. In terms of timeline, I have provided a very hopeful estimate in terms of when we can get what steps done. So right now the target is by the 20th we should be able to get the VM running with the OpenJDK Loom thread library, including stubs for the virtual thread, to pass the sanity testing that does not actually test virtual thread, but will test other functionalities once we merge the changes in. And June 10th, we're looking for the basic virtual thread support, which would be able to allow us to, in Java, create and execute virtual threads. And by the end of June, we're hoping to get the fully virtual thread functions to be supported. By I think July, we're looking into getting all the minor edge case and test issues that we're seeing resolved. But as I said, this is a very optimistic estimate right now. We don't exactly know if we would be able to hit everything on time.
Have you been talking with the GC team about their requirements?
No.
There are no GC requirements because of the approach we're taking. The root scanning remains the same because we're still using VM threads underneath virtual threads. There's a lot of opportunity for optimization though, as we're going to have a lot more VM threads lying around than we currently do. So there may be cases where we don't have to scan as many VM threads as we are. But in terms of a first pass, getting something functional, there are no requirements there.
So every virtual thread is going to have a J9 VM thread. Those J9 VM threads are going to be in the VM thread list?
Yeah.
We may find that use cases that make heavy use of virtual threads, that our time to safe point becomes quite large.
Yeah. So I certainly expect that the first pass is going to have optimization opportunities, and we will have. I'm certain we can come up with solutions to address them. But I'd say at this point, we're not in a position where we can even start to address those things.
I think it would be good to make sure that you're engaging early with Dimitri and Alex on what the GC is going to need out of this. I understand that you're going to keep them as full threads in the virtual thread list, but I think we're going to find that the limitations on that are going to hit us very quickly. Jack, is there anything else you want to call out around this plan?
Not at this moment.
The one other thing I don't see on this list, and maybe it's included in part of testing, is performance testing.
We are currently not considering performance for virtual thread at the moment. We are focusing on the functional support.
Okay.
I guess in terms of performance, we will be looking into that once we have the full functional support being implemented. We'll probably be looking into more of what exact performance we're hitting during testing.
I strongly encourage doing some initial sniff tests at least, because shipping something that's tragically slower is not going to help adoption. We need to have something that at least is in the reasonable ballpark. So leaving this to the point where at least validating the assumption that we're going to be in the right ballpark gives you a chance to course correct. If you don't do that validation, we're going to run at a runway on this.
Right. Yeah. I will try to add that into the plan.
Jack? Cheng, is there an update on Panama?
Yep. For the upclock on the Eclipse LE, set for LE, so I fixed errors, including the native threads in terms of the code optimization out there, and the verified test case, test, which works good. And currently, we finished all the things on the primitive on AX VPC accessory with float and get started on the structure support. Also, I'm trying to investigate the issues with smaller page size, which is AX, to see what I can do with that. In terms of estimation timeline, I already talked to the JIT, because this total depends on how the sound generation code is ready on JIT. So they estimate there should be still have 1 or 2 months get everything ready on DOS and x86. But the timeline still are not ready for the x64. Kono just to get started to see how they can do that, because they still have other workload on x64. So x64. So on our side, we think based on what we have on X, that should be just most 1 month, just a couple months away to get everything ready. It's like early next month, or middle of the June, so it should be ready for review. That's our plan.
I'm just gonna slide up and check the release timeline. We're hoping to branch July 22nd.
Okay.
And so if our thunk code is ready in 2 months,
right,
we're going to be really close to that deadline.
So the work on the JIT has Julian's got the PowerPC stuff done. Drew just started on Z last week. Expectation is it's probably going to be about 3 to 4 weeks of work. I mean, it's until we get into it, we're not going to be sure. Kono-san started the looking at what needs to get done in AR64. It's probably going to be about the same amount of time as well. And x86, that won't start until probably a couple of weeks from now. I just don't have the people for that. But Z and AR64 should be, I would think, comfortably before the branch. x86 will be a little bit closer to the branch, I think, when it's ready.
I don't see Mac listed here. Is that just assumed to work with Linux and Windows?
I would consider Mac to be part of just the platform work on AR64 and x86.
Continue to be concerned that we're going to have a hard time making this release deadline. Understand that there are constraints, but we do need to be looking at what we can do to shift things around, because this is going to be a really hard release to get out the door. All right. In terms of the M1 work, is there any update on this?
That status is current. Kono-san just updated it today. So yeah, the main two issues that we have right now are DDR support, which requires, which does not work with Xcode 13. We found that Xcode 12, what we were testing with up until this point was fine, but Xcode 13, it doesn't work. So we need some work to to the dwarf dumper to work with the dwarf dumper so that it'll work. I believe Keith is going to start looking into that at some point. And the other is compressed ref support, which has been a little bit slow in terms of coming together, but again, I'm hoping to make some progress on that in the next little while.
Okay. Thanks, Daryl. Keith, anything to call out around the shared library rename? Must have dropped. Babneet, is there an update on the method handles work?
I think there are two updates. One is for 3rd May and one is for 10th May. 3rd May was added after the meeting and 10th May was added today. Both mention of footprint numbers, which were requested a few calls back. And for Nashon, under 3rd May, the OpenJDK method handles always uses more class memory, but the total memory is less than OpenJ9 method handles because the object memory goes substantially down with OpenJDK method handles. And for Liberty Radiator, for 4 of the 6 benchmarks, I'm seeing the same or better footprint, but there are 2 outliers where I'm seeing a footprint regression. And for that regression, the standard deviation is very high, so I'm not sure if it's because of the variation in runs or if it's a real regression, which will need further investigation. But and I think this sums up my update. So what do we need to what more information is needed so we can decide whether to proceed with supporting OpenJDK method handles in 8 and 11? Because I think that question is still unanswered.
So my concerns for 11 are much less my concerns for 8, just given the length of time the 2 releases have been in the field. And the biggest concern I have for 8 is related to the amount of class memory and the limitations people may be running into. And that starts to become a discussion around the risk for a particular set of users.
And how much more class memory usage will be deemed as a risk? Or because currently we are only seeing it in the range of 2 to 7 megabytes more.
So it seems like a reasonable amount to me, but I no longer have access to the numbers that would have been the customers who are bumping into the limits on these things. So if IBM is comfortable with the risk to their existing customer base, an OpenJ9 perspective, I don't have a problem moving forward with this.
Understood. So I think I will ask the IBM stakeholders what their viewpoint is with these footprint numbers, and then I will bring an answer back next week during the call.
Thanks, Babneet.
Yep.
Realize we're over time, but is there any last comments that we need to handle today? All right, on that basis.
One thing, there was a pull request that you commented on, Dan. It was a very ZOS-specific change related to obfuscating some code, and the change was made a lot more generic. I think we just wanted to make sure you no longer had a concern with that.
If you can send me the link to that pull request, I can validate that. I'll do that after this call.
Sure.
Is there anything else for today? And thank you, everybody, and we'll call it here. Bye.
Thank you.